Welcome to this conference, a very important topic on the issue of unveiling the uncounted costs of conflicts, the war on climate.
Today, we have a great deal said by policymakers on the subject of climate change, but their focus tends to be more financing or greater investment in innovation and research, and sometimes deliberations about technology transfer. It is very rare to hear any of them acknowledge the harm that conflict and war cause to the agenda of creating a resilient, sustainable environment. A recent meeting of the African Union Peace and Security Council reflected on this link between conflict and climate change. They asserted that investigations by the AU reveal a strong link between climate change and conflict. We need to create conditions in which peace can support stability and focused responses to climate change. I think if you have a situation of conflict, you cannot pay attention to all that needs to be done to respond to climate change effects or to reduce their harm.
Military emissions begin long before the first shots are fired. The building of bases, the constant movement of troops and equipment, the operation of entire logistical networks, it all consumes staggering amounts of fuel. Transport alone accounts for about half of military emissions. To give just one example, fueling a single Abrams tank for a day uses as much fuel as a small car would in a year, and there are 10,000 of them currently in service. And when the fighting stops, the emissions don't. Rebuilding can be just as polluting. The war in Gaza, for example, has left the region in ruins. Early estimates suggest that reconstruction alone could generate over 60 billion tonnes of CO2, mostly from the concrete needed to rebuild what's been lost. The next step is to reduce those emissions, not by disarming, but by rethinking the way militaries operate. This isn't about weakening national security, it's about strengthening it in a way that doesn't come off at the cost of planetary security. We need militaries that run on clean energy, not fossil fuels. We need defence forces that protect not just borders, but futures. And more than anything, we need fewer wars, less conflict, more diplomacy, and more peace.
In 2024, over 92 countries were engaged in military operations. That's nearly half of the world. We now face the highest number of conflicts since the Second World War. At the moment, we have 56 ongoing wars globally. But there's a question I think we must ask. If climate crisis threatens our national security, why are we not including the military in our climate policies? Right? In fact, we are doing the opposite right now. While global military budgets rose sharply, I mean, all of you have heard in the news in the past maybe few months about, increasing spendings on military in Europe, NATO countries, China, Russia, Middle East, and so on. At the moment, we are spending 30 times more on militaries than on climate action. In war zones, the environment is collateral damage. And in post-conflict recovery, environmental restoration is rarely a priority, even though local population often depends on degraded ecosystems for their survival. So, as I think all of you agree with me, this cycle is vicious. Environmental degradation breeds conflict, and conflict accelerates environmental collapse. Without peace, the planet cannot heal, right? Yet, governments continue to frame climate action as an individual responsibility. Turn off your lights, recycle, drive less, fly less, these kind of actions, while ignoring the elephant in the room, the institutionalized destruction that is war. if we are to meet this 1.5-degree target from the Paris Agreement, which, by the way, we are already dangerously close to breaching, we must integrate military emissions into our climate strategies. Because without peace, there is no climate justice. Without transparency, there is no real accountability. And without international cooperation, we believe that there is no sustainable future.
So the bottom line is that the Paris Agreement can only be effective if governments are providing comprehensive and transparent national greenhouse gas inventory reports, so that when the global stock takes occur, we have accurate estimates of the change in total human-caused greenhouse gas emissions, and we know whether we have to ratchet up people's ambitions, whether policies need to be strengthened, and if so, in which area. The lack of mandatory, comprehensive and transparent accounting and reporting of military emissions is therefore a major concern. It's a major gap and a major impediment to progressing the implementation of the Paris Agreement. It's absolutely essential if we're to limit global warming that military emissions have to be brought in to the equation.
The military is responsible for 6% of global emissions. And it made me think about how Africa, a whole continent, is responsible for about 4% of the global emissions. Like, this is such a stark statistic, and I think it should be on the front lines of every newspaper. We cannot, clearly address the climate crisis without addressing the emissions in military activity, from supply chains to actual war and, to rebuilding after war. The climate cost of Israel's war on Gaza could exceed 31 million tons of carbon dioxide. And that is, a carbon footprint that will exceed the emissions of around 100 countries. So it's important that we emphasize this deep and often overlooked interconnectedness between climate and conflict and military activity. My panelists have also talked about, the devastating impacts on the environment, from pollution to, the food and water security, to livelihoods being destroyed, and even biodiversity at that. So it's not just, the war on climate, it's, the war on people, it is the war on our nature, it is the war on our entire planet. There is no climate justice without addressing the war on our climate. There is no climate justice without addressing the war on people. There is no climate justice without addressing, the war on our biodiversity. And it is happening right now.